4 of the 11 hard rally events have now been cleared. And next up, we've got another snow rally. And after giving this much thought and deliberation, and because I have technically used all but two of my Subarus up to this point, I figured I might as well use the actual 2001 rally car, because, well, technically this year does mark 20 years since the unfortunate demise of 2001 World Rally Champion Richard Burns, and I figured I might as well drive this car, more or less, in his honour, especially since he is technically the first and only, I'm really trying my hardest here to get my words out, the first and only English rally driver to win the WRC. And I said English because, well, Richard Burns originated from Berkshire, whereas Colin, well, we all know he's a Scotsman. And putting on the Stage 3 Turbo, I figured I might as well use this thing just as a tribute to arguably England's first and only World Rally Champion, where he went on to beat none other than Colin McRae himself in the 2001 rally standings by simply being more consistent than his competition. And that was precisely how he won, because consistency wins you championships. And I figured, well, because I wanted to honour Richard Burns in his memory, I figured I might as well use the 01 Subaru itself, since the rest of these will probably be up against Group B cars. So 5 laps around both the forward and reverse courses here at Chamonix Lake. A smooth rhythm is paramount in mastering the winding hairpins. And so let's go. And we are starting off by competing against the Evo 6. I have a strong feeling we probably don't need the turbo, because last time I raced against the Evo 6 and put on a turbo, I basically obliterated him. So I'm convinced in saying we don't need the turbo for this first race. I think we should be fine. Should I remove the downforce? Who am I kidding? I'll take a little downforce off just so the car is not producing too much. Just so the car is not producing too much drag. And if we win here, we will get a total of 66 points. However, since I am convinced in saying that we should be okay for this, especially since I beat the Evo 6 pretty comfortably last time I raced him, I reckon this should no doubt be the same. I don't think this is going to be too hard for me to pull off, as I'm already 1.4 seconds clear of him. And I just figured I'd drive this car because, well, November of this year will mark basically 20 years since the death of England's first and only World Rally Champion. And also, if I'm using British terms, just a fine bloke in general. I honestly heard that Richard Burns was just such a nice man to be around. It's obvious to say, of course, that a lot of people no doubt respected him. Plus, the other reason I'm doing this is, well, because it was technically Jeremy Clarkson who, believe it or not, in November of 2005, who did actually pay tribute to England's first and only World Rally Champion with a tribute movie short to basically honour the great man's memory. And in all honesty, I figured I had to do a similar tribute to that by simply doing this. Because I figured there would not be any greater chance for me to pay homage, let alone a tribute, to the great but late Richard Burns. Very much a rally driver of both order and discipline. And also someone who knew how to be delicate but fast with the equipment he drove. That's honestly just how much of a remarkable driver he truly was. And I also have no doubt in saying that he would have honestly gone on to inspire probably many other rally drivers, and possibly teach him as well, had it not been for that very unfortunate demise in 2005. I couldn't tell you what his exact cause of demise was, but I am convinced in saying that it was linked to a brain tumour that he was suffering from at the time. Which again is very unfortunate because, well, as I said before, Richard Burns was very bright-minded. And I think it's fair to say that had it not been for Burns' unfortunate passing, he definitely would have gone on to very much inspire a generation of future. He definitely would have gone on, like Colin McRae more or less, to inspire pretty much a whole generation of rally drivers who basically got where they are because, well, Burnsy was basically their main inspiration. There was honestly no other nice guy you could think of in the WRC from about the early 90s up to the mid-2000s. There was probably no other driver you could think of that was honestly any nicer to talk to or interact with than Richard Burns. And that was why I eventually decided this was probably the best way for me to honour his memory. In some cases this might be emotional, but in other cases, well, because we are approaching the 20th anniversary since his unfortunate passing at just the age of 34, it was only natural for me to think about my alternatives, and I decided, well, this was probably the best time. For me to honour basically a remarkable rallyist as well as also just a remarkable man to be around, or so I've heard. And also a very, well, if I'm using Star Trek lore here, a very honourable man as well. And I say honourable because I know of course that from someone who is also a Star Trekian, I do typically tend to more or less be aware of those typical Klingon beliefs. The other reason I say that as well because I've watched every episode of Star Trek the original series and Star Trek the Next Generation. So, if I was going to use, I guess you could say, Klingon lore in this instance, and I know this is probably mostly unrelatable to the subject, but I can definitely say Richard Burns technically is someone who fought in the WRC with honour. And it is fair to say that he definitely would have been involved in more racing had it not been for that brain tumour cutting his rallying career short. I have a feeling he would have gone on for at least another 6, maybe 7 years in the sport, possibly more. He was basically just a bright-minded individual. He basically left us far too soon. And whilst I can say this might be emotional, the truth is, I do at least consider it to be, well, I guess you could say, it's truly honourable for me to at least pay some sort of tribute to Burnsy. And yes, under the circumstances, this is very much a personal choice. And in terms of the race altogether, well, aside from me talking about just how young and bright-minded Richard Burns really was, and also throwing in the odd Star Trek reference, which I do from time to time, well, I figure it's at least appropriate for me to welcome this as a tribute. Also, one other thing I've noticed about this car is my lap times are actually pretty good, and right there at the end I get a penalty. But that's okay, because I did have a pretty sizable gap up front anyway. I don't believe the Evo 6 is going to catch me before the end of this. We are on the last lap of the first race. Although I personally never met Richard Burns, I can definitely understand why there was a certain minority at the time, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, who were fans of Richard Burns. And since this car technically did win him the championship, as I said before, the very least I can do is basically pay tribute to one of Britain's greatest ever rally drivers, or phenoms. Is what I should say. Sometimes it is nice to have those nice guy personalities. And of course, as I said before, well, the reason why Richard Burns won the championship is well because he was consistent. Now, as we head up towards the end of race 1, where I've basically spent the last probably 11 minutes now pretty much just talking about how great Burnsy was. I have won this race quite comfortably, and that's mainly because I was up against the Tommy Mäkinen Edition Evo 6. But there we go. One race down, and now we must get through the other race. I may also need some water before continuing with the rally events. But either way, there we go. Race 1 is down. Well, now we move on to race 2. Okay, so before we get on with this race, well, I basically decided to stop recording so I could basically get the vitamins in my system because, well, my voice was very much sputtering after that first race, and I felt like it was kind of spoiling the moment, so I decided to step away for a minute or so, get my vitamins in me, and see if that manages to improve the complexion of my voice. So this time, we're racing against the 2003 Subaru Impreza rally car. Ironically, another one that won the World Championship with Petter Solberg. The third and last driver to win the WRC under the Subaru banner. So in a way, you could probably refer to this as being very much a passing of the torch, if you will. But hopefully, if it's possible, I can manage to pull this off for Burnsy. Even though I did of course decide to not. Well, I clicked on the settings because, well, I figured it was easier for me to just head over there, step away for a minute or so, and then just get back to recording afterwards. I might have to do what I did before, which is probably just run the walls. Not exactly the cleanest way to do it, but the truth is, I know there are certain ways where you can get through these walls and you can get away with it. That might be the only occasion you see me do that, but the truth is, I just really want to get this over with. I don't want to go through a repeat of what I went through at the Grand Canyon. Excuse me. So we're now on the bridge once again. And it looks like we might just be in business to potentially win this race. Even though I did kind of cheat to get there, but the truth is, there are certain boundaries that you can basically rub the fenders of the rulebook in. And since I figured this was the case, I just figured it was easier for me to simply just get my tactic over and done with. And then afterwards, I can just focus on leading the chase rather than simply stalking my opponent in the chase. Of course, I figured this was probably going to be a more compelling battle anyway than what I had with the Evo 6. And whilst I technically have paid tribute to Richard Burns already in my playthrough of WRC 2001, I figured I more or less had to do it again because, well, by November it will have been 20 years since his unfortunate passing in 2005. Ironically, the same year this game came out worldwide. But I think it's fair to say that we're definitely, in spite of that one wall ride I took, and I have noticed there are at least a few racing drivers who use the wall riding technique, this has been a pretty compelling battle. Nonetheless. And as ever, well, if you have to get trickery involved, then you have to get trickery involved. If it comes down to these sorts of ordeals. Sometimes that's just the vibe when it comes to harder events in this game. Not exactly the way I would normally do it, but then again, it's also a matter of making sure that you can keep up with the AI for long enough to realistically go for a passing maneuver that might be there. And that's why sometimes you just have to get the elbows out. Not exactly the most flashy way to pass your opponent, but sometimes you don't play to be flashy. It's a lot like poker in a way. You don't play to be flashy. Can I not just get the other words out? Okay, let me start over. Because in events like this, it's almost like you're playing poker. Basically, you don't play to be flashy. You play to win. Or, in the very words of former Eagles linebacker Herman Edwards, also known as Herm Edwards, you play to win the game. A denotation that is quite literally so obvious to say that it practically makes sense in pretty much almost any game you play, whether it be real life games or, if you're like me, then in general just, well, video games. But anyway, I'm not gonna lie, this has been a pretty thrilling battle altogether, and I can definitely say there have definitely been moments where the 03 Subaru has managed to keep up with me for longer than I think the Evo 6 probably ever could have done. But at this stage, this has been a pretty engaging battle. And I am glad to say that while the first race was pretty easy, this one, for it being a bit more challenging with trickery being involved, I've still managed to at least keep myself in the lead for most of it. Now, we have just 2 laps to go here at Chamonix, and hopefully, if it is possible, this will be where I manage to successfully score another clean sweep, since that is precisely what I did last time with the Escort Cozzy. Can I get a clean sweep for Richard Burns? And to very much honour the great man as honourably and gracefully as I possibly can. In spite of me touching the walls constantly. So, the Pater Solberg Subaru is closing in on me again, but I am at least able to hold my ground. I am very much playing defensively at this point, and I am convinced in saying that I should be able to pull this off. So, with now just a few corners to go on this lap, in what's very much been a snow tarmac crossover, that's also very much a maze to work your way through. It's pretty obvious to say that I am managing to live up to the honour of Burnsy quite well. And my voice is flailing on me again. Could also be because of the time of day. But whatever. Point is, I'm still in it to win it. And that is all I care about. I would consider taking a drink whilst I'm at it, but because I still have just so many corners to go around at the moment, unless I decide to hit pause and just give myself a sip of water, I honestly just want to finish the event first. I think it's probably easier for me to simply just bite the bullet of finishing the event first, and then getting the drink I have beside me once I am done with this event. I might also consider doing a playthrough of Richard Burns' rally at some point. I have thought about doing that. I really have. And through the tunnel, and I am 1.2 seconds up. Needless to say, rubber banding is definitely stronger in the rally events than it is in most other events. And now, over the bridge we go. And there we go. I just miss out on beating my previous best lap time, but I do manage to score the sweep. Alrighty then. So that is now the Chamonix rally sweeped. And before we move on, I might as well save the replay as well, because appropriately it is with two Subarus. Well, to me at least, it is the 01 Impreza that overcomes the 03 Impreza. Basically, a case of me appropriately showing the 03 Subaru who's boss. And that's why I of course paid tribute to RB. Because, well, I wanted to, and, well, because I figured it was an appropriate time to do so. Okay, moving on. Just having a sip from my bottle. It's probably not the last time that's gonna happen. And for winning this, we get the Lancia Stratos. My god, does this thing look good. If there weren't any Group B cars involved in the next few events, I would definitely consider using the Stratos personally. Because I gotta say, I love this thing. I, like many other fans of Rally, love the Stratos. But there we go. So that's now 5 of 11 in the hard rally events done. And next up will be the George V rally, which is probably where the Group B events will begin. And then we've got all these. But anyway, there we go. Now, let's go and check out the Stratos. So, 46.6% complete, and my win ratio, it's not really moved up by much, but we have now passed 1,300 miles driven, even though we probably did that in the previous episode anyway. Yeah, we probably did pass that previously. But anyway, let's go and find our Lancia, as I'm gonna make this easier for myself by doing that. So here it is, the 1977 Lancia Stratos WRC car. And once again, it sells for yet another identical price to all the other rally cars I've won so far in the hard events, with that Ferrari Dino V6 that ultimately powers this thing. But anyway, there we go. George V rally is up next.